Hi again then guys, and welcome to another installment of Visions of Tomorrow, the review series for all of the Vision GT models of Gran Turismo, be it 6 or now Gran Turismo Sport as well, of course, for the foreseeable future. And this particular machine is a carried over Vision GT car. Of course, we do have some new ones, which we've seen in the demo, the Fittipaldi, the McLaren, cars which we haven't even had the chance to drive yet. This one, though, we do have a point of reference for, in a similar way to the Toyota FT1 and the Peugeot, because we also have it, at least in another form, on Gran Turismo 6 already. But the main difference with this particular Vision GT car, the Volkswagen Vision GTi Roadster in particular, is that the other two cars are notably changed in comparison to how they're represented on Gran Turismo 6. The Peugeot, for instance, is significantly heavier and also less powerful. The Toyota is also less powerful. This one, though, is much more similar to what it's like on Gran Turismo 6. In fact, the power and weight are virtually identical. It's got 578 horsepower from that 3-litre mid-mounted engine, 515 pound-feet of torque, which is incidentally higher than both the Toyota and the Peugeot, and it weighs 1,222 kilos. Now, to put that into some perspective, that is lighter than the Toyota, but a little bit heavier than the Peugeot. And so that means that the Volkswagen is, at least on paper, pretty evenly placed. It sits kind of between the others. That is, apart from with power and torque, which it's better than both of the others at. Now, it will be interesting to see how these three Vision GT cars from the beta compare to the newer machines, at least the ones that are in the same classes. Obviously, you're not necessarily going to be taking it up against stuff like the McLaren or the Tomahawk, but you are going to be able to take it up against some others, and also some non-Vision GT cars as well, especially given that these are Group 3 category vehicles, and there are, of course, plenty of other real-world and also fictional Group 3 cars in the beta, in the demo, and by definition in the full game as well. Now, incidentally, the horsepower per tonne on this car is not quite the highest of the three, but it's only got 1 horsepower per tonne less than the best of the three VGTs, which is the Peugeot. The Peugeot has 474, this one has 473, so barely anything between them. And the thing about this Volkswagen is that, in a similar way, more so actually to the Peugeot than the Toyota, at least for me personally, this on Gran Turismo 6 is a very, very dominant force and a definite weapon for PP-specific racing. Now, currently, we don't seem to have a PP system in Gran Turismo Sport. It's more about overall classes, which is fair enough, and that could be a more accurate way of doing it because it allows for a lot of variation between the vehicles in those classes, whereas when it gets down to PP levels, sometimes cars are way too high, sometimes they're far too low and therefore OP. This system on Gran Turismo Sport, I would say, is better in that regard. It's less specific, which some people might not like, but it gives you a better overall idea of how good the car is going to be. And I would say that the fact that this Volkswagen in particular, rather than the Toyota or the Peugeot, the fact that it's in the Group 3 category is very telling, because that means that much of this car's raw ability has just been straight up carried over from Gran Turismo 6, because the Peugeot on Gran Turismo 6 is an LMP level machine in terms of how competitive it is, especially around the 700 pp level. The Toyota, not so much, because you can't really tune it, you can't upgrade it, it is what it is. It's not bad, but it's got a very limited range of use, especially once you start taking it up against upgraded race cars. This one, though, is really good at going up against GT3 cars and the like already. So that has very much so been carried over to the beta. And if you haven't played the beta, and perhaps haven't played the demo either, although in the case of the demo it doesn't really matter, but if you haven't played those, this is the most relatable, I would say, of the three cars in comparison to GT6. If you want to know how this car will perform, GT6's version of it is a pretty good gauge, because the only real difference is the lack of all-wheel drive. That's a pretty big difference to have, but at the same time, this Volkswagen was already so good, especially around tracks like the Nordschleife, where it really was a force to be reckoned with because of how user-friendly it was, not just beginner-friendly. That has been carried over. It's still at least as competitive, not necessarily as good, but those are two different things. It's not necessarily quite as quick as it was with all-wheel drive, but it's still as competitive in comparison to its new rivals in the Group 3 category. In terms of straight line performance, I highly doubt, to be honest, that the top speed on this car will be as high as it was on GT6, because this can be tuned to do over 250 miles per hour on Gran Turismo 6. I don't think it's going to hit that on GT Sport. I highly doubt that. Maybe 220 at best I would have expected, but we'll have to wait and see. And as far as stuff like acceleration goes, of course the all-wheel drive makes a big difference off the line. The launch isn't as rabid on this car, it's more of a typical race car kind of launch that you'd expect. And that goes for the Peugeot as well, because it does feel kind of neutered in that way. Although with the Peugeot, the fact that it weighs more and has less power means it feels slower anyway. So with the Volkswagen there isn't as much of a difference, but there's a difference there for sure. Overall though, it's a great car to drive. I've always considered this to have one of the best interior cockpit cams of any of the VGTs. It's such a nice place to be with the speedster style wraparound windscreen which it has. I've always loved cars that have that. Two things which I love on open top cars are speedster windscreens and buttresses behind the seats, and this car pretty much has both of those things, so I love it. As far as performance goes, it's going to be at least as relevant as it was on GT6, and perhaps with the new regulations now, even more so. Because whereas the Peugeot is quite a physically large vehicle, and the Toyota feels much more like a conventional GT car, the Volkswagen still has that kind of unique flair to it, which the other two don't have as much. Not in the Group 3 category anyway. So overall, if you enjoyed this car on GT6 and made a lot of use of it, I don't think you'll be disappointed with it on GT Sport. It's still very good. And so overall, that's it for this particular pick. Of course, you can check out plenty more Gran Turismo Sport reviews that I've done already, both for specific cars and for the game itself as a whole, in both demo and beta forms, by clicking through to see those at the end of this video. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.